Hi, welcome to the Education Policy Equation. This is a podcast where I interview people with interests in the educational system. On this podcast, I'm going to have open discussions with people from all kinds of different backgrounds to gain diverse perspectives on how education currently works and hopefully how it should work. Today is August 2nd, 2023, and it is our first episode. My guest today is Dr. Gray Hunter, Senior Lecturer in Economics and the Academic Director of the Masters in Business Analytics program and the Undergraduate Statistics team at Eller College of Management at the University of Arizona. And on a personal note, Dr. Hunter was my honors thesis advisor, in which capacity he was really valuable to helping me learn more about the economics of education. Dr. Hunter, thank you very much for being on the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I look forward to some useful dialogue here and hopefully adding a little value if possible.
So, I guess I'd like to begin just because we talk about education so much by asking about the role that education played personally in your life. At what point did you become interested in economics? And then at what point did you decide to pursue a career as an educator?
Yeah, I mean, a loaded question early. I'm from a small Eastern Kentucky town, Ashland, Kentucky, and I had no idea what economics was even about until my sophomore year of college. So I went to Center College, which is a small liberal arts school in Central Kentucky. And honestly, I started off as a chemical engineer, kind of hoping to go down that route, and then I found out I didn't really like physics, kind of that college level. And then as soon as I took that first econ class, it was over, right? I knew I wanted as much of that as I could possibly get, and so I majored in financial economics, which was kind of the only economics degree that they offered, and I worked for a couple of years after graduating center, and I didn't get enough. So after talking with a couple of my educators from center, they suggested the PhD route, and so I applied and got in. Thankfully, to a few places. Went to the University of Kentucky, where I didn't know it at the time, but they let you teach a lot, especially if you're good at it. And I apparently was good at it, and so I taught something like, I can't remember. It must have been 11 to 12 undergraduate classes during my 5 years at the University of Kentucky. And yeah, honestly, after the first time in the class, I knew that was something that I wanted to make permanent. And so yeah, and I mean, where what role education has played in my life is uh, hugely important. I was very much lost when I got to college, and luckily I got to center, and those instructors were just amazing. And it would, regardless of subject. I mean, I took classes on the Crusades, religion, art history, economics, psychology, chemistry. Like every professor was just very dedicated to the students, and I don't know that I ever felt that, but I felt like they expected you to be there and to show up, and they believed that you could be successful. And luckily, I was with a lot of their help, and so I've really taken a lot of what they've done and incorporated into my teaching at the University of Arizona, which is kind of the opposite of a small liberal arts school, but it's been positively received, and yeah, it's been awesome.
Yeah, on that note, on your teaching, you teach a lot of really big statistics classes. And, it's a lot of people see statistics as a really daunting subject. I know a lot of friends of mine in the business program are really intimidated by statistics and they just want to get it over with. What do you do personally to try and make statistics maybe a little less scary to students who might have math phobia?
Yeah, I mean, you've said it right there is a big issue. Is the way a lot of stats is taught is this implicit assumption that you're good at math and you can do it quickly and you can go through, and you have to be good at it to understand it, which I mean, it helps, but in all my teaching, whether it's stats or economics or data visualization, which I'm kind of getting into, I always start at the end. Like, why is this important? It's very easy to to get lost in the notation, especially in statistics and economics, because both are pretty math heavy. And you don't ask the question like, why am I doing this? Or if you do ask it, you don't get an answer. You're like, well, just do it because I said to do it. So I always start with like, here's how data is being used. Here's how stats is being used by large companies that, or small companies or governments to kind of make decisions to be more efficient. It's like I showed the why right there. Here's why we're doing it. And then you kind of go back and you lay the foundation mathematically and stuff like that. But in you actually, I try and deviate away from the math. I mean, obviously you have to have an understanding of math, but I always boil down the notation into like plain English, like what like the summation like scares a ton of people away. And when in reality, just like just add these things together. Like if you simplify it like that, which it seems like hasn't been done for a lot of students, it is terrifying. And so yeah, just kind of starting with the why first, and then always focus on application. Right? I'm not huge into the theory. I understand it is important, but at least for my non-statistic major students, they're all business students that are going to hopefully leverage data in whatever major they go through. I'd rather them know the why and kind of how they may be able to use it than the nitty gritty underlying theory and proofs and stuff like that.
Yeah. And sort of still on the teaching note, what your own research, at least your doctoral dissertation, involved a lot of discussion of like student expectations and academic success. You could just briefly tell us the role that expectations have in success and what, if anything, you've taken from your research to aid you as an educator.
Yeah, so I mean, boiling it down to as simple as possible, it's just, and it came from my own personal experience. You have to expect to be successful, right? We have to get students to believe that they can complete high school and that they can complete college, because a lot of people like they don't believe it's possible for them, and it and I take a lot from the grit kind of psychology literature, where it's just as simple as a mindset shift or an instructor saying, "I know this is difficult, but you can do it," right? Getting away from that, like, well, I'm just not a math person, or my like I never that no, like that just means like we haven't approached math in a way that connects the dots for you. And so it's honestly just getting people to believe in themselves, and when they do well, praising them. When they don't do well, figure out where are the issues, right? And part of it is like, did I do a bad job covering the topic, or was there something that happened in the student's life, or are they just busy, or do they just not care at all? A lot of different factors, but like trying to assess like if there are issues, how do we address them and move forward? And so I spend a lot of time, like I know people don't like to do this, but I read my teaching evaluations from all 500 students every semester, and I look for what's bad, like what's showing up that they said is bad. And some of it I can't control, but other things that I can control, like I'd love to have more practice, or can we record these things? Things like review sessions, or even the practice from in class. And so yeah, just using what students tell me to figure out how do I educate them better? How do I learn better? And then I mean, I learn every semester, and I pay attention to the kind of the teaching, the economic research, literature, and like with the 500 students, it is really easy to feel like just a face, right, in a large crowd. And this professor is never going to know who I am. So I do make it kind of a point for students that either do really well, or if they're struggling early, I go through, I send them an email and I say, hey, great job on the first test, keep it up. Or if I see there's a big improvement after a test, I say like, hey, like I noticed that you did a really good job and you improved, like whatever you did, keep doing that. And if I can help any other way, let me know. Or if I see that like someone hasn't attended class in a month or something, I say, I reach out like, hey, like it's really hard to be successful in this class without showing up. What's going on? How can I help? Or can I get you connected with resources, stuff like that. So honestly, stealing a lot of stuff from my liberal arts and applying it to a big classroom to make it as personable as possible.
You do a lot of work with stats and data visualization, as you mentioned. Um, The term data literacy is sort of common a lot of times these days, and we're being told more and more that it's important to be data literate in the modern workforce. But I think a lot of people don't know what that means. What does it mean to you? What do you think being data literate really entails? What sort of human capital is contained within that term?
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. Like, what's the definition? I mean, I've been to multiple conferences where the sole objective is to define what do we mean by data literacy, and we left 2 days later and we didn't. Right? We had a 10 different definitions. So honestly, how I approach it is, are you first? You can't be scared of numbers. You got to be okay with hearing numbers, digesting them. And honestly, if something doesn't make sense, be able to spot that, right? And say, like, I need more information, or that doesn't sound right. Like, that's the biggest thing I would focus on with data literacy is try not to be duped. And you see it in the media all the time. We spend a lot of time on the difference between percent versus percentage point, which is a huge sticking point and kind of bends a lot of students' brains because they live in the percent world with like their final grades and all that stuff. But in reality, percentage points are very, very important as well, and it helps understand percent a little bit better. And so, honestly, it's hearing a statement, reading an article, listening to a podcast, hearing someone cite a number, and then saying, "Okay, that makes sense," or "That doesn't sound right." Like, is there something else going on? Like, it's like a mystery novel. That's what stats are. I'm a detective, right? Like, I have some outcome, well, why did that happen? Or what other factors could be at work? And so, honestly, just curiosity about numbers and not accepting the status quo because it's tempting to get kind of just people can bury you in numbers and you just say like, oh, I believe it. You cite these numbers, you seem really smart or whatever, and that's the last thing I want people to do. I want people to hear something and say, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, are you sure you did that right? Or stuff like that. In terms of human capital, just working with data is the best way to do that. Because I mean, I do a lot of Excel and Tableau. I think Excel, it's a great tool. It is extremely frustrating. It's a high fixed cost program. But I've honestly learned a lot of my data literacy by just playing around with data, like using formulas and getting something. I was like, I have done something wrong. Like, there's no way that number can be right. And then spotting that, and like it's maybe I've referenced something differently, and you've had to think through the logic of how formulas and stuff work. So yeah, like I think just experience playing around with it, even if it's Tableau, and just seeing something in a visual that doesn't make sense. Maybe a certain category is like much higher than another, or very very different that you didn't expect, and then just questioning that and thinking about it rather than just accepting it. That would be my like loose definition. Um, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense to me. I like what you said about just being able to have a discerning mind when it comes to numbers. I think that's increasingly important. And I'm hoping to get an idea of what your intuitions are on the trend of data literacy. Are we going to see a massive spike in demand for people that are data literate? Or are we entering an age where AI is going to take over so many of these computational jobs that it becomes relegated to a small group of people who really, really understand data?
Yeah. Will there be a big spike in demand? That's already happened. If anything, we're very, very far behind in fulfilling that demand. And big things are happening. So, like, I hear and I read all the time about modifying high school curriculum, which I think is probably the best thing that we can do because then we can reach just much more people than we do at the college level. Now, we could do a lot of things at the college level to improve on that, but substituting some of the, I don't want to say less useful, but less applied for the larger population classes like trigonometry for a data literacy or a financial planning, because those kind of can go hand in hand and can be taught really well together. I think we're seeing that now. Education moves slow, especially public education, and for good reason, right? We don't want to chase the random rabbit um, down the rabbit hole, and then it's immediately obsolete. So I understand it, but we are moving slow. And in terms of AI, like I'm afraid to comment. So, as any economist will tell you, forecasting is hard. If you'd asked me a year ago, prevalence of AI, like my answer would have been completely different because it's exploded in the last, I mean, just 6 months. Really, it's kind of we've seen this exponential growth. I'm not as worried about it. I do think like with other technology, it could spread the gap between. I mean, I don't like we say high skill and low skilled labor, but we could think those who leverage technology and don't leverage technology in their work. Like I could see the same thing happening with AI, where the people that get on the ship first and get trained in it and know how to utilize it can really push themselves ahead of a lot of other people, and I think really, really quickly. Now, AI was really accurate and then it learned from us and has become less accurate over time. And so like I don't think we'll ever get rid of that critical thinking piece. Some people are saying like it's the same thing as like when Excel was invented or a calculator was invented, everyone's like, well, it's like no one's going to know how to add or anything like that. And we talked about it earlier, like you still have to be able to like tell Excel what to do, and then if it gives you the wrong thing, spot that mistake and say, "Oh, I have made a mistake. That doesn't make sense." And I think the same thing is going to happen with AI. It's like, well, it's I've asked you this question and it's giving me this, and it doesn't make sense, right? Is it wrong? Am I asking the question incorrectly? Am I applying it correctly? Like statistics is, I love it, and same thing with econ, the combo, because you think you change one thing and then 80 other things change or 80 other things are related that you want to like think about. It's like I love that aspect of it, and I don't think, at least right now, that AI can just say like, oh, I'm going to replace everyone, because then like, well, what are we going to do, right? Like, and maybe it will. That'd be awesome. Like we'll kill the 40-hour work week, which we probably should anyways, honestly. And we could leverage technology to enjoy ourselves more and not work ourselves to death, which is kind of a U.S. concept. I certainly would be in favor of that. So if we could find a way to do that, I would be in favor. But I don't think it's at that point where it's just like, oh yeah, AI is going to replace everyone and we're going to be literally doing nothing or defending against the machines, depending on how you kind of think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I got kind of a second question that's similarly related, and maybe you've already answered it, but a slight turn on that is, I mean, I guess I'm noticing the trend of like a few years ago when the massive online classrooms were out, and sort of people were predicting that classrooms were going to be changed dramatically because all school was going to go online, and it hasn't really um, matched the scale that was predicted a few years ago for these online learning environments. So I guess my question right now is sort of about the future of educational technology, and AI might play a part in that. Do you have any intuitions about there being really dramatic changes in education tools? Or do you think that, learning is something that's best done in a sort of traditional environment like it has been? You have a teacher who helps you along. Do you have any intuitions about the future of education that way?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, you could do a podcast just on the possibility. Of course, it's like even before COVID happened, technology was becoming more prevalent in the classroom, and now it exacerbated that and sped it up. If anything, you're seeing a little bit of fatigue from that. Like students, especially at the University of Arizona, they were really happy to get back and then get rid of any Zoom options. Um, and I think honestly, it depends. Like there are some people that can get on YouTube and sit down for 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, and can teach themselves whatever they want. Now there are other people that they just can't like, and maybe that's because of the traditional classroom setting that we have and how we just train students how to learn from like, I mean, preschool on, right? You're taught sit in a classroom, listen to this person up front, and then do the task that they assign. Um, and so like, I don't know if that's maybe a constraint that we're kind of dealing with. Um, there's so many factors that are with it. Do I think we're going to leverage technology more effectively? Yes, I hope so. Do I think the need for me will ever be useless? I mean, selfishly, I would say hopefully not. Hopefully, I add a little bit of value, but partly it was like if we could get everyone to learn on their own, that would be amazing, right? Like then I could go do something else, I guess, or I can go learn extra or new things. But I think it'll be hard just because of how we train students to learn, and then we're in this kind of weird like misinformation or disinformation kind of age to where, well, what's credible, what's reliable, and universities are places where faculty get together and honestly research amazing ideas that are changing the world, which I highly support and we need more of. But it all is, it's credentialed, right? It's to the point where like, all right, like it's a certified, you can trust what the University of Arizona is kind of churning out, and then the free market kind of determines like, well, if you don't hire or uh, get recruit anyone from Arizona, which I think would be a mistake because I think we do a great job. But we have kind of that credentialing. And now Google has their online platform. Khan Academy does some amazing things. I just listened to a podcast, The Update with Stephen Levitt and their school through Chicago. So, yeah, long-winded answer is it depends. Some people can really take off on YouTube, Coursera, Google, LinkedIn Learning, whatever the platform is, and pick up a lot of amazing new skills. And some students, they need a person in the classroom and just checking along, a little bit of accountability, like, all right, are you hitting these set tasks and going through? And if anything, confirming that they are learning it. And so, yeah, both, I guess, is the long, short answer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It reminds me sort of, I'll read a lot of people sometimes who sort of in the area that I like to research, which is teacher quality, and they'll say, well, teachers don't matter at all because you just teach yourself everything you need to know, and teachers don't teach you anything. And I think there's probably like a small group of people who really don't need teachers and who really learn well by themselves. And I know a few of those people, but I think that the vast majority of people, I count myself among them, really benefit from quality teaching. And I think that sort of is a similar point to the one you were making about how, it's there's sort of asymmetry in some people really need, or some people will really benefit from rapid, easy access to information. But for other people, learning is going to continue to progress largely along patterns that it has already. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and I mean, along those lines, at worst, an educator can just be a confirmation. And like my research, like I found there were issues with overconfidence and stuff like that. But a lot of students just like they think they know it, but they want that, okay, yeah, that's right. Like, yeah, and I'm thinking about it correctly. Or like, I mean, a lot of work that I did with you is you thought correctly. I just said like, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Like just expanding like where to go next rather than like the YouTube, like, well, here's the next video in this stream. That's kind of my job for a lot of students is just like, they'll ask a question. I'll be like, well, have you thought about this? Well, could this be the reason? Or just kind of that thinking component is hard to simulate by yourself. Now, again, like you said, a select few can, but I think that is the hardest piece is just getting an and part of that's on education. Like students like to get an answer and they're done. Well, in stats or economics or I mean a lot of it's never here's the answer and you're done. It's like well here's the answer and well why might that be the case or there are lots of other things to kind of go down or other aspects to consider. So that's like my favorite part of the job, honestly, is this sparking curiosity. And students hate it. They don't like the why. Like they like to get like the answer is four. Like like it might be four, it might be 400, like it might be like yellow, like who knows? So I think those are the cool things of education that I think it helped me a lot to break that kind of one answer structure and think of sort of a lot of different things.
And then this is a question that you kind of touched on a little bit earlier, but I guess I'd just like to come back to it a little bit. So, if you were like the education czar for high school education, so you're a college educator, but now I'm putting you in the role of in charge of high school education, and you have to make one class mandatory, and you can design this class how you want. What class would you make mandatory for students, and what would it look like?
Oh my goodness. What age are we talking about that? This is gonna differ. Like high school?
Yeah, the by the time you've completed high school.
I mean, is it selfish if I say financial slash data literacy? This I think that I mean even myself, like so I started my own LLC and it felt like I was guessing, right? I hopped on Google and I was like, well, I hope I did this right. Same thing. I took a class in college where we had to do someone's taxes for them by hand, right, without TurboTax. And I think of the 31 people in that class, one person got it all correct, which is ridiculous. Like, and every year I still fill out my taxes. And I was like, well, I hope this is right. And I guess I have a terminal degree. I have a PhD in economics for goodness sake, and I worry about like, stuff like that. And those are skills though that a student that shouldn't have to go to college to get, and shouldn't have to be. And say like buying, like I just bought my first house, and process of getting approved for the loan, making sure that the rate was fair, what fees should be in there, what insurance we needed, what inspection, like I had to learn that by trial and error essentially. And now I'm pretty good at spotting when people I think are taking advantage of me and doing my research on stuff. But like, we don't teach kids how to do that. Like, if I wouldn't have had a PhD where I worked with data all the time and I knew how to kind of navigate what websites I could trust and things like that, and I had peers in the econ department that I said, hey, like you bought a house, like who did you use? What was your advice? I think we do a huge disservice by not teaching those things. And we don't need to like balance a checkbook or anything like that, but stuff like that everyone does. Everyone's going to have to pay their taxes. Everyone hopefully is going to buy or invest in a home. Everyone needs to save for retirement, right? The big issue now is that Social Security is going to go bankrupt. I'm 30, whatever. How old am I? 34, 35. I don't expect to receive a single dollar of Social Security just because I expect something crazy to happen to it. So, like, I'm planning away from that. It's like I'm trying to save more responsibly. And when you learn about how powerful compound interest is, I wish, and I've learned that. I've really just learned it in some of my college classes, but I was too broke to save. But it really didn't hit home until I started planning, like, hey, here's when I really want to stop working. Here's what I need to do. Here's how much money I'll need. And then if I'd have been doing the same thing, just saving like $100 a month 5 years earlier, it's worth thousands of dollars that it's worth now. So, like, big things like that that everyone's going to do should be required. The big thing, taxes, buying a house, keys of retirement savings, and the products like 401k, IRA, Roth IRA, and that could all be woven together because that's going to impact your taxes and things like that. You could think equity from a house and how to pull it out. When like, I mean, that would be I would love to have taken a class like that. It would have made my life 1,000 times easier now than having to learn it on my own and just guess, right? Like, and I think maybe senior year would probably be the best, or maybe junior year or something like that. You could weave in, honestly, like applying to colleges and stuff like that. I was blessed to have two parents who went to college and have advanced degrees that guided me through that. If I wouldn't have had them, like the same thing, right? You're winging it, which is that's unacceptable for us, right? Like we need to educate the students and give them at least as many options as possible. I certainly would have learned appreciated that even more than I don't know, maybe my I had a love-hate relationship with my calculus teacher, and she was really hard. She got me a 5 on the AP test. She expected a lot from me, but I use calculus less than I worry about making sure I pay the correct amount of my mortgage and pay it extra early to reduce the amount I'll pay by 100 grand over 30 years. Like, so I think that would be a required class, and I'd require you to pass it too, or a C maybe even to pass. Um, yeah, that'd be it.
And then I got one more question, and I'll let you go. Um, this is if you had to teach a class, um, that was like unrelated to economics or data or statistics or anything, and it doesn't matter how much you know about it, you can learn about it enough to teach it. What's a subject you think would be fun to teach students about?
Oh, this is a good one. I didn't really appreciate how important history was, and even so, like I didn't know much about geography. I did come from an amazing Eastern Kentucky high school who did the best that they could, but a lot of it was motivation stuff, and you'd always see pictures of the Grand Canyon or pictures of the Eiffel Tower, and then you get to these places and you're like, wow, like I didn't even have a chance of understanding how like amazing this thing is. Now I still think the Eiffel Tower is kind of ugly, but the Grand Canyon's amazing. Like I got there and I was like, I don't know how you do this thing justice. I think with technology now, like you could get like the headsets and get students there. So maybe some sort of amazing like geography slash history class and how like we kind of repeat the cycle over and over. I think that is where I have the least amount of knowledge that I would love to spend a year in a cave or something, a work den where I just learn as much as I can and then kind of go down that route to kind of make history and geography actually entertaining for that level. And maybe it's just a thing with age. Maybe you just don't appreciate it till you get older. But I wish I had that appreciation now. Back when I was 18, I would have traveled more. Honestly, I'd go see more cool things rather than not.
Absolutely, I think that's a cool choice. I like that a lot. Well, that's about all the time we got, but I want to say thanks again for being on my podcast, Dr. Hunter. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I appreciate you having me. And I'm always well. I could sit and talk all day. I think you know that. I do want to throw a special shout out to all the educators. Everyone's working really hard, especially getting back from COVID. We're dealing with special circumstances. A special shout out to everyone doing K through 12. The more I learn about all of that, like we need to we need to support those people more. Like so, like if I was teaching that class, I would give a lot of funding to whoever's going to teach. They're in charge of our future generation and preparing them, and it's a really difficult job. Um, and so, thank you all, and thank you for diving in, and hopefully this is valuable.
Amen to that. Thank you, sir.